Today, we delve into the chilling story of Richard Engelbert, a thriving real estate agent whose double life unraveled into a shocking murder. At 48, living in Littleton, Colorado, Richard's secrets would lead to his untimely and brutal end. He was a well-known real estate agent in the neighborhood, frequently seen showing customers houses in his svelte black BMW with a license plate sexy realtor. Richard had a stepson called Harrison and was wed to Wendy, a principal of a school. He has over 20 years of experience in the real estate industry and received his business degree from the University of Colorado. Littleton residents trusted Richard because he came off as dependable and amiable at all times. Richard occupied a spacious, two-story home with a well-kept yard. He was frequently spotted by his neighbors working in the yard, waving and grinning warmly at them. He frequently sponsored neighborhood Little League teams, participated in community events, and attended church on Sundays. Richard appeared to have the ideal life, a stunning house, a lucrative job, and a devoted family. But Richard lived a double life. He'd had a sexual connection with his stepson, Harrison, for the previous 2 years. Richard concealed this connection from the public out of concern that it would damage his standing and career. Furthermore, he persisted in having sex with other men via his job, utilizing the houses he displayed as covert meeting spots. Richard was under a great deal of stress and strain because of his multiple lives. Richard was very active at work, closing deals, and meeting clients in the days leading up to his death. He frequently arrived home after work and worked long hours. Anticipating a weekend escape to the Bahamas with his spouse Wendy, he hoped to unwind and temporarily forget his problems. In addition, Richard intended to go to a friend's 4th of July cookout, where he anticipated seeing old acquaintances and unwinding from his busy schedule. Richard was pleasant and endearing, according to his pals. He had a knack for making others feel valued and at ease. Richard's secret existence bothered him terribly, despite his outward friendliness. Because of his affair with Harrison and the falsehoods he invented to hide it, he felt terrible. In addition, he was concerned that Wendy would find out and that it would ruin his marriage and his reputation in the neighborhood. Richard was a man under pressure in his final days, attempting to balance his public demeanor with this inner struggle. His hopes for a flawless existence were gradually disintegrating, resulting in a terrible and violent conclusion. Around 3 o'clock in the afternoon on June 27, 2014, Wendy Engelbert left her work as a school principal early. She was excited for a quiet evening, maybe catching up on her favorite book and watching a Netflix series. At first, everything appeared normal when she entered their home on Bleak Street in Littleton, Colorado. She yelled out for Richard, placing her keys on the kitchen counter, but she got no response. Wendy, sensing something was off, made the decision to investigate the basement, where Richard frequently spent time watching the History Channel or working on his real estate files. It was odd to see the basement door slightly ajar as she descended the stairs. She shouted out to him once more loudly this time, but nothing happened. She was shocked to see what was waiting for her at the bottom of the steps. Surrounding the lifeless corpse of Richard was evidence of a brutal battle, lying splayed on the floor. Richard's face was bruised and pummeled, and there were bloodstains on the furniture and carpet. He had a thick men's luxury belt around his neck, obviously used to strangle him to death. Wendy let out a terrified cry and hurried over to her husband's side, giving him a shake and making a valiant effort to rouse him. However, it was already too late. Wendy reached for her cell phone and phoned 911 while in a state of shock and bewilderment. Her voice cracked with passion, and her hands trembled as she talked to the operator. "My spouse has passed away. I believe he was killed," she sobbed as she tried to gather her thoughts. The operator told her to stay on the line until the cops came and attempted to calm her down. Luby Johnson-Gantz, Wendy's neighbor, heard the disturbance and went to investigate. She discovered Wendy weeping hysterically while sitting on the front steps. While they waited for the police, Luby stayed with Wendy and made an effort to console her. Wendy's mind was racing with thoughts about who might have done this and why, and the minutes seemed like hours. Upon their arrival, the police proceeded to secure the area and take Wendy and Luby out of the basement. Wendy could hardly believe what had happened to her. She was in shock. Who would do this to Richard? She repeated again and over, her mind unwilling to accept the terrible truth of her husband's passing, over and over. The sleepy town of Littleton was rocked by the discovery of Richard's body. As soon as word of the murder spread, friends and neighbors gathered outside the Engelbert residence to discuss the horror that had befallen their otherwise picture-perfect neighborhood. Wendy Engelbert called the Littleton Police Department in a panic on June 27, 2014, at 3:15 p.m. Within minutes, officers led by seasoned detective James Cattle, who was renowned for his careful approach, arrived at the site. Police cars soon encircled the Engelbert residence, which was situated on a peaceful Oak Street, and yellow crime scene tape was draped around its boundaries. Upon entering the basement, Detective Cattle and his group were met with a graphic scene. Richard Engelbert's lifeless body was resting on the ground, a men's luxury belt securely fastened around his throat. There were obvious bloodstains on the furniture and carpet adjacent, suggesting a rough battle. With a steely resolve, Detective Cattle, a gregarious man in his late 40s with keen eyes and a composed manner, surveyed the scene. The police gathered evidence as the first step of their investigation. They captured every detail by taking pictures of the incident from different viewpoints. Detectives meticulously packaged the belt used in the murder as evidence, and looked for any fingerprints or other hints that would point to the perpetrator. Investigator Cattle saw that Richard had struggled for his life, as shown by the overturned furniture and traces of a battle. When forensic specialists arrived to analyze the site, they collected samples for DNA analysis and used luminol to find blood traces. They searched the area carefully for fibers, hair, and other possible evidence. Even the most seasoned cops were taken aback by how gruesome the murder was, but they didn't let that stop them from collecting as much evidence as possible. Wendy Engelbert, who was still in disbelief after finding her husband's dead, was questioned by Detective Cattle. She told of her day, including the terrifying moment she discovered Richard. She gave a thorough and moving description, but she claimed she didn't know who might have done this. Wendy's alibi was promptly confirmed because she was employed when the crime occurred. The cops then started policing the area. Luby Johnson-Gantz, one of the neighbors who had helped Wendy, was among those they spoke with. Sarah told of finding Wendy upset and comatose on the front steps, having heard her screams. Nothing looked out of the usual, although several neighbors had recounted seeing Richard earlier in the day. In an attempt to locate any leads, the police also looked through Richard's most recent phone and email data. They found a number of odd calls and messages that seemed to indicate Richard had been having sex with other guys. This information provided fresh insight into the case and suggested possible reasons for Richard's covert existence. The police kept up their efforts as the day gave way to night, anxious to identify the perpetrator of the heinous murder of Richard Engelbert. After clearing the area, Detective Cattle and his group examined the evidence they had gathered and got ready to move forward with their investigation. Littleton residents watched tensely, wanting justice and answers for Richard Engelbert. Richard Engelbert's wife was the first person to be suspected of his murder. Wendy Engelbert. Wendy, 47, was a well-liked Littleton school administrator who was renowned for her tenacity and brilliance. She had worked for the school system for more than 15 years and was quite active in the neighborhood. Her co-workers characterized her as authoritative, committed, and constantly pursuing perfection. Wendy was hauled in for interrogation on June 28, 2014, the day following the murder. Leading the questioning and attempting to put together her behavior and feelings was Detective James Cattle. Wendy addressed questions with composure despite being worn out and upset. She described her day at work and her dreadful return home to find Richard's body. Wendy seemed calm, but her perplexity and rage were palpable. She stated that she was shocked and upset by the affair, and insisted that she was unaware that Richard was having sex with other guys. When the affair was revealed, Detective Cattle's questioning of Wendy intensified as she dug further into her sentiments of her husband's betrayal. Wendy was questioned by Detective Cattle on her relationship with Richard. She acknowledged that their union was solid, but she also added that they had recently had some difficulties. Wendy stated that she had no idea of Richard's covert existence. She indicated that the reason she might not have noticed any indications of Richard's secret life was because of a recent ski accident that had made it difficult for her to interpret people's body language. Wendy had a strong alibi. She had spent the entire day attending meetings and getting ready for the new school year at the school. Security video and co-workers attested to her being at work on the day of the murder. Still, she was a person of interest because of her relationship to the victim. Detective Cattle looked into Wendy's potential motivations as well. She valued her work and reputation highly, and Richard's romance placed both at risk. Wendy, however, adamantly denied having anything to do with the murder, and said she was innocent throughout the interrogation. She was kind and gave all the information asked for, including her phone number and email address. The Engelbert residence was thoroughly searched by the authorities in an effort to find any evidence connecting Wendy to the crime. Their lack of damning evidence supported her alibi and assertions. Nevertheless, the investigators continued to exercise caution, since they knew that feelings may lead even the most sensible people to act in a desperate manner. After being questioned for many hours, Wendy was freed, but the inquiry kept her under observation. While they pursued other leads, the cops closely observed her interactions and movements. Layers of secrets and motivations were progressively coming to light in the murder of Richard Engelbert, making it appear to be a complicated case. The next person suspected was Richard's 21-year-old stepson, Harrison Engelbert. Harrison had a difficult past and worked as a part-time bartender while attending college. As a youngster, he had gone in and out of 12-step programs and rehab. Harrison was adamant about changing his life and was attending a nearby community college to earn a psychology degree in spite of these obstacles. Harrison was hauled in for interrogation on June 28, 2014. Given the delicate nature of Harrison's connection with Richard, Detective James Cavell proceeded cautiously with the interview. Harrison seemed apprehensive yet helpful, eager to offer his perspective. Harrison told the police that he had spent the previous 2 years having a covert sexual connection with his stepfather. He talked of being torn, fighting the lies and the concealment. Harrison disclosed that he had ended the relationship abruptly after learning that Richard had been having extramarital affairs with several other men, utilizing the houses he listed as a real estate agent as covert gathering spots. Harrison appeared to be both angry and depressed during the questioning, not just because of the affair, but also because of the deceit and manipulation. He felt betrayed by Richard. Harrison insisted he had no intention of hurting Richard despite his hatred. He claimed to have been working as a bartender the night of the murder, and many witnesses corroborated this account. Detective Cattle investigated Harrison's potential motivations in further detail. Despite his background of mental instability and substance addiction, the young man's recent efforts to maintain sobriety and academic concentration provided a different image. Harrison was candid about his difficulties and his wish to leave Richard's destructive relationship behind and move on. In an effort to find any proof that Harrison was involved in the crime, the police also looked through his social media accounts and technological gadgets. Although there were some tense and conflicting texts between him and Richard, nothing that clearly linked him to the murder was discovered. Given that Harrison resided in the residence, it was not shocking that his DNA was discovered there. Harrison was a tough person for the police to identify as the criminal due to his cooperation and reliable alibi. After being questioned for many hours, he was freed, but he continued to play a significant role in the investigation. The police kept an eye on his relationships and activities, looking for any fresh information or discrepancies that might clarify his role. Detective Cattle and his crew were left with more questions than solutions due of the intricate interactions between Richard and Harrison. They were hoping to learn more about the horrible murder of Richard Engelbert as they dug further. In the inquiry, the third suspect was 30-year-old Alexa Hernandez. Alexa was interesting because of her past with Richard Engelbert. Her marriage ended when she discovered Richard having an affair with her husband in the house's toilet while they were sightseeing. Known for having a short fuse, Alexa and Richard had more run-ins after the event. Detective James Cattle brought Alexa in for questioning on June 29, 2014. As a waiter at a well-liked neighborhood cafe, Alexa was known for her outspokenness and independent spirit. With a stubborn look on her face, she entered the questioning room prepared to defend herself. First, Detective Cattle inquired about Alexa's relationship with Richard. She came clean and said she hated him for breaking up her marriage and giving her so much grief. The day Alexa found out about her husband and Richard together was the worst day of her life, according to her. After that, she'd confronted Richard many times, demanding an apology and answers, but he'd dismissed her every time. Alexa stated she had been working a double shift at Denny's when people wondered where she had been on the day of the murder. She gave the identities of her colleagues who could vouch for her alibi. Alexa's boss verified to Detective Cattle over the phone that Alexa had spent the whole day at work when she contacted the diner. Several co-workers attested to have seen her as she worked. Despite Alexa's strong alibi, Detective Cattle looked into her potential motivations in more detail. Although it was clear that she was still very angry with Richard, she stated that she had moved on and was now concentrating on starting again. In order to help others who have had similar hardships, Alexa said that she was enrolled in night studies at a nearby community college with the goal of becoming a social worker. Attempting to find any evidence that may connect Alexa to the crime, the police examined her car and residence. Nothing troubling or damning was discovered. There was no communication between Alexa and Richard in the weeks preceding the murder, according to her phone records and social media posts. Even though it was clear that Alexa detested Richard, she remained cool and collected during the questioning. She provided straightforward answers to all queries and showed no remorse or dishonesty. Although she was cooperative and honest, Detective Cattle recognized that they needed to consider all options. Alexa was freed after being questioned for many hours. Aware that she may be a suspect due to her history with Richard, the police kept a close eye on her. Nonetheless, it was challenging to explicitly link her to the crime due to her alibi and dearth of proof. With every interview, the Richard Engelbert murder investigation became more intricate. Although Detective Cattle and his team were committed to finding the truth, their work became more difficult due to the complex web of lies and secrets surrounding Richard's life. In search of the piece of information that would ultimately lead them to the murderer, they persisted. The inquiry took a drastic turn on July 3, 2014. In Littleton, Colorado, it was an incredibly hot summer's day, with highs in the upper 80s. Detective James Cattle received a call from the forensic lab at about 10 in the morning. While going over objects from the crime site again, they had discovered important new evidence. A tiny covert camera that was put in the basement and masqueraded as a smoke detector was one of Richard Engelbert's possessions. The video was quickly acquired by Detective Cattle and his colleagues. For the last 2 weeks, the camera had been recording everything that happened in the basement, including Richard's covert gatherings and conversations. A tape from the day of the murder was found when they went through the video. A furious dispute between Richard and his stepson Harrison Engelbert was captured on camera. After a short while, the debate turned physical. In the footage, Harrison is shown becoming enraged and using the opulent belt to choke Richard. He took it from a nearby chair. With the whole episode documented on camera, Harrison's involvement in the murder is proven beyond a reasonable doubt. The crew was astounded by the act's savagery and its obvious motivation: angry and treacherous. Detective Cattle called Harrison and requested that he come in for additional questioning based on the new evidence. Harrison did not know of the video evidence against him when he arrived at the station. Cattle confronted him with the video during questioning. Harrison's expression abruptly altered. His early composure gave way to fear and despair. Harrison broke down and admitted it, realizing he had been discovered. He clarified that he felt coerced by his mother Wendy and stepfather Richard into staying in the relationship. He had reached his breaking point because of Richard's adultery and his ongoing dishonesty. Harrison said that he had killed Richard in a fit of irrational wrath in an attempt to escape the oppressive circumstances. Harrison's confession was meticulously recorded by Detective Cattle, who made sure every detail was captured. The confession, along with the fresh evidence, proved Harrison's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Now that Richard Engelbert's murder had occurred, the police could clearly see the intricate web of lies and secrets that had encircled the investigation. Just before noon on July 4, 2014, the Littleton Police Department took a significant action. Harrison Engelbert was prepared to be arrested by Detective James Cattle and his squad for the murder of Richard Engelbert, especially in light of his confession and the damning video evidence. Harrison, a 21-year-old college student and part-time bartender, has been leading a turbulent and disorganized existence. He had tried to get over his difficult background, but his mother's manipulations and the great emotional strain of his romance with his stepfather had pushed him over the edge. The police found out that Harrison killed Richard in a fit of fury after being overcome with sentiments of manipulation and betrayal. Harrison's apartment was visited by Detective Cattle and many cops on the day of the arrest. Harrison answered the door when they knocked, his face pallid and worn out. He was read his rights and given handcuffs. Harrison exhibited no emotion as he was escorted to the police car, appearing resigned to his destiny. Though it was a peaceful area, a few interested bystanders observed the action as it happened. Harrison was formally accused with Richard Engelbert's murder back at the station. A last interrogation was done by Detective Cattle in order to record every aspect of Harrison's confession. Harrison restated his perception that he was under pressure from his mother Wendy, and that Richard was trapping and manipulating him. He recounted the furious debate that had turned into the deadly attack, as well as the circumstances preceding up to the murder. Harrison's mother, Wendy Engelbert, who is Richard's wife, was also brought in for interrogation. According to the inquiry, Wendy had been pressuring Harrison to carry on the romance for months. She was afraid that her prospects of winning the next school superintendent race would be ruined by Richard's careless sexual activity. But Wendy wasn't a direct participant in the killing. Despite the fact that her deceit and manipulation made the case more complicated, she was not prosecuted. The information startled Richard's relatives. They had not known about Richard's secret life and had just regarded him as a loving husband and parent. A range of feelings, including anger at the betrayal, sadness at Richard's passing, and a sense of terrible inevitable outcome given the circumstances, were brought on by Harrison's imprisonment. The news rocked the Littleton community. The community was rocked to its foundation by the murder, which had revealed a dark world of lies and secrets. The Engelbert family and the community as a whole attempted to process the horrific events that had occurred while Harrison awaited his trial. Though the case had been solved by the police, the emotional fallout would not go away quickly. The wounds Richard left behind would take a lot longer to heal, but the truth about his life and death had been exposed. On August 15, 2014, Harrison Engelbert's trial got underway in Littleton, Colorado. Family, relatives, and members of the local media crowded the courtroom, all anxious to learn more about the specifics of the case. Both local and national news sources covered the trial, making it a noteworthy event in the community. District Attorney Laura Mitchell, a 45-year-old woman renowned for her powerful courtroom appearance and commitment to justice, oversaw the case. She said that Harrison killed Richard Engelbert with premeditation, motivated by feelings of deep-seated betrayal and rage. Her main pieces of evidence were Harrison's confession and the hidden camera footage. Mitchell underlined that although Harrison's actions were the outcome of a tumultuous and difficult relationship, he was ultimately accountable for his stepfather's horrific death. Z. Barnes, a 40-year-old non-binary advocate who has a track record of fighting well-known cases, represented the defense. Barnes contended that Richard and his mother Wendy's severe mental upheaval and manipulation were the causes of Harrison's behavior. They asserted that Harrison struggled to regulate his behavior because of his fragile mental condition and the pressures he was under. Barnes requested a guilty conviction with a consideration for a lower charge in the hopes that the circumstances would result in a more merciful sentence. Wendy Engelbert and other family members of the victim sat silently during the trial, clearly upset by what was happening. The disclosure of Richard's second life and the ensuing chaos had taken them by surprise. As they heard the specifics of the affair and the murder, their feelings were evident. The verdict from the jury was returned on September 5, 2014. It was decided that Harrison Engelbert had committed second-degree murder. Although Harrison had killed in a moment of fury, the jury found that the murder was not planned. Diverse responses were received to the ruling. A few believed that the decision was fair considering the psychological and emotional aspects of the case. Others said that considering the severity of the act, it was overly forgiving. Harrison received a sentence of 25 years in jail without the chance of release. Although the matter seemed to have concluded with a punishment, Richard's family's suffering and trauma remained. Knowing that someone so close to them was the reason behind Richard's death, the Engelbert family found it difficult to move on. The trial had an effect outside of the courtroom. It changed Littleton forever by making the people in the neighborhood face the unpleasant truths of deceit and deception. Following the case's conclusion, the Littleton community and the Engelbert family started the challenging process of getting over the awful events that had happened. Life in Littleton, Colorado gradually returned to normal after Harrison Engelbert's trial ended in September 2014, but the case's effects persisted. The terrible murder of Richard Engelbert and the ensuing discoveries left the town severely disturbed, and it took a long time for them to recover and adjust. Harrison Engelbert was still detained by the Colorado Department of Corrections, where he was serving a 25-year term. He struggled with his own emotions and the fallout from his acts, which continued to define his existence in prison. Harrison is said to have been quiet and reclusive while inside, concentrating on finishing his degree through accessible programs. He made use of the opportunity to think back on his previous choices and get help for his mental problems from counseling. Richard Engelbert's wife, Wendy, faced her own difficulties. Her knowledge of Richard's affair and her deceptive behavior were made public throughout the trial, and this had a big effect on her personal and professional lives. Her campaign for school superintendent, which she had been assiduously pursuing, was impacted by the incident. She had tried to project a flawless image in the past, but the disclosures caused her to drop out of the competition. Wendy made an effort to start again away from the spotlight, going to counseling to deal with the emotional damage and deal with how the incident affected her reputation. Littleton started to move ahead in the months that followed the trial, but the case's wounds persisted. In remembrance of Richard Engelbert and to provide support to those impacted by the crime, the community organized memorials and outreach activities. The tragic events involving the Engelbert family served as a somber reminder of the difficulties that might exist behind closed doors. Even when everything returned to normal, the case continued to be a tragic chapter in Littleton's history and a reminder of the profound effects that violence and treachery can have on both individuals and communities. A terrible reminder of the intricacies and secrets that might lie beneath the surface of seemingly ideal lives is provided by the murder of Richard Engelbert. It's a story about lying, deception, and the terrible effects of leading two separate lives. We appreciate your participation in this episode. Follow this channel for deeper looks into the most surprising crimes.